Okay, so is it switched on? Can you hear me? Perfect. Yeah, the idea today is to give you some information about NewsGuard, what we do, how we generally work with the researchers, with the journalists. And in the second part of the presentation, I will be focusing on our recent reporting on journalism and AI. So the risks that AI has brought on the table and the solutions we can put in place. A quick presentation about the company. NewsGuard is a company that was launched in March 2018 in the US. But now we are active in 9 different countries, and it's a company made of journalists, and journalism is really at the base of our work. The mission of the company is to fight online misinfo and disinfo, and the idea that brought our 2 co-CEOs, who are 2 veterans of journalism in the US, to start this company was to basically rate news at the source level. So doing something a bit different compared to fact checkers. So generally fact checkers evaluate the reliability of single claims. We try to do something to determine how reliable news and information sources can be considered. During these 6 years of work, we have been producing 2 big data sets. The first one is called News Source Reliability Ratings, and it's this. As I said, it's basically a rating of news and information websites that account for at least the 95% of online engagement with news in the countries we operate. And then I'll tell you a bit more about how we do rate news sources. And the second data set we have been producing, it's called Misinformation Fingerprints, and it's basically a catalog of the main false claim circulating online with a debunk done by our analysts and examples taken from websites, social media accounts, so everything in the online space. So reliability ratings. We have rated more than 11,000 news and information websites. Those are basically 35,000 sources if you take into consideration all the social media pages that are connected to the outlets. And we provide what we call nutrition level of a website, like a nutrition level of something you buy at the supermarket, Nutella. You can turn Nutella and see what's inside in the nutrition label. We try to do the same with news sources. So we try to create a context to help readers to understand who's behind, how this outlet works, which kind of editorial practices are in place. And we have done that in, as I said, 9 countries plus Ukraine. I said 9 countries plus Ukraine because in the 9 countries we actively operate, we have rated all the news sources accountable for the 95% of online engagement with news. And those countries are US, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, so 5 English-speaking countries, and then Italy, France, Germany, and Austria. While in Ukraine, we did a project together with Reporters Without Borders to help local outlets in basically providing some information about their accountability and having their spaces into the circuit of the advertising industry. So we can say to brands, these are reliable sources, you can be safe and put your ads there because you are not financing propaganda or disinformation. How do we rate a site? We apply journalistic criteria of credibility and transparency, completely apolitical, so we do not enter into the merit of the content that a site publishes because everybody can publish whatever opinionated content they want. We just try to understand which kind of editorial practices they put in place. So when it comes to credibility, we check if the site repeatedly publishes false or egregiously misleading content. We check if the site gathers and presents information in a responsible manner, meaning citing sources, not plagiarizing content from other outlets. We check if the site has effective practices for correcting mistake, and if they do that in a transparent way, so notifying reader about the correction, not correcting the error inside the article without saying anything to the readers. We check if they handle the difference between news and opinion in a responsible manner. So if they do have an agenda, we check if the agenda is hidden or disclosed. And if they publish opinionated pieces, we check if those pieces are properly labeled. So labeled as commentary or editorials or opinion pieces. And then we check if sites avoid deceptive headlines. When it comes to transparency, we check if sites are transparent in disclosing ownership and financing, so telling the readers who's behind. If they clearly label sponsor content, so not presenting it as an editorial piece of content. If they reveal who's in charge, so the editorial leadership and any conflict of interests, if there are any. And if they provide information about content creators. So we apply these 9 apolitical criteria, and as you can see, each criterion is associated to a certain amount of points. Criteria are binary, so either the site respects the criteria or it doesn't. And according to how the site goes, according to the criteria, we provide what we call a reliability rating. So you have an overall score that goes from 0 to 100, but we don't want to provide a simple number. We want to explain why that determination of the site. So in the nutrition label, you can find all the information about our analysis. Our approach, as I said, is completely apolitical, and I think the strength is the fact that it's totally transparent. So we are not doing that in a secret way, like an algorithm analyzing information. We explain very clearly how we do rate a website. We explain very clearly what a site should do in order to meet or not to meet a criterion. And another very important point is that we apply journalistic rules to our own work. So every time there is a criterion which is not met according to our analysis, we get in touch with the publication and we ask for comment. We give them the possibility to reply to our criticism. And we add those comments into the nutrition label. So a reader can basically get our analysis, but also the reactions of the site that we have rated. And of course, we accept no fees from news sites we rate, and we are very transparent also in telling readers who have been working in each piece of analysis. So you have bylines of journalists that analyzes website, and we have a very strong editorial process. We need to be sure that there are no human bias in our analysis, so we have more than one person involved in every analysis. There is a drafter, a writer that studied the site, read content, and started to write the nutrition label. Then we have at least a couple of rounds of editors. So a first editors that check on our work, ask for more comments, and then there is a second editor that check on the nutrition label. Then we contact the site for comment, and we insert the comment into the nutrition label. Then there is a final review by our 2 co-CEOs and also by what we call a senior advisor in each country. So in each of the countries we operate, we have a journalist with a deep media knowledge, a deep knowledge of the media landscape of that country that review everything we produce. And only at that stage we publish our analysis. And we keep the analysis up to date because, as you know, sites can change their editorial practices, they can be sold and change ownership, so we need to go back and update our analysis on a regular basis. For a single user, and that's basically what we offer to online readers as a sort of media literacy tool, NewsGuard is a browser extension. So if you download the browser extension into your browser, when you are browsing online, you can visualize our ratings for every link you see in a search engine or in your feed on social media. And basically the idea is not to tell the readers what to read and what not to read, but to provide an additional context. So if you are curious to know, here I put a search on Google, war in Gaza. You have the first 4 results coming from Politico, BBC, the Times of Israel, and BBC again. You can choose what to read. If you want to know something more about who's feeding you that piece of content, you can basically click on our icon, and you can see, if you hover with the mouse, you can see a bit of a summary of our analysis. So a very a short top-line description with the score. And if you click on see the full nutrition label, you access the full sheet of information about that specific website. And you can read information about ownership and financing, about the kind of content the site generally publishes. There is a very long credibility section where we address the credibility criteria. So for each of them, we explain why in our analysis it is a red cross or a green tick. And if we say that the site regularly publishing false content, we need to provide examples. So in the nutrition label, you will find example of false claims spread by that website with our debunk, etc. This was the first big data set that we produced. The second one came a bit later because when we are analyzing a website in the nutrition label, we regularly add examples of false content. So at some stage, we realized that we had a very big catalog of false claims we have been using over the years to support our analysis. And we decided to put them together, creating this catalog of the top false narratives. And we call it misinformation fingerprints. It's both human and machine readable because there are a lot of metadata and seeds associated to it. And for each fingerprint, so for each false claim, we provide a description of the false claim with the variation, because you know that sometimes false claim develop slightly differently in different languages or different countries. We have the debunk done by our analysts. We have a list of reliable sources, debunking the myth. And we have, for example, related search terms, keywords, and hashtag with which the false claim appeared online, so it makes it easier to identify the claim. And we have a long list of examples taken from the web. So here is an example of information about the false claim that the Sandy Hook school shooting was a stage event that featured crisis actor. So you have the false narratives, you have the metadata, so the topics where it has been spreading. Associated labels are the news sites that we have rated where we have found that specific false claim. So the two data sets are linked one to the other. And then, as I said, you have subject terms and search terms and keywords. Now we have more than 3,000 entries in the misinformation fingerprints. We have been working a lot to track misinformation about the presidential election in the past 3 weeks. And actually from September 1st, we have identified more than 90 false narratives about the election. And of course, we have been added them into the misinformation fingerprints. So the idea here is to have what we call the pre-bunking approach. So instead of the fact-checking approach that arrives a bit later, when the false claim is already out and people has read it, we try to act in a preventive approach. So telling readers, look, this is a very problematic source. This source have been publishing misinformation in the past. We know that very often these informers are repeat offenders. They publish this information on some topics in the past. They are doing that now on other topics, and they will probably do that in the future. So as long as we can identify a source as a disinformation source, so we can be more careful when we are about to read a piece of content coming from that source. So in these terms, we work a lot with schools and public libraries. We provide our browser extension for free, for example, to public libraries. So, and we have a lot of partnerships around the world. We organize workshops with patrons, trying to explain what they need to pay attention to when they are consuming news online. In the US, we have a partnership with the American Federation of Teachers, so they can use our browser extension with their students, and they were very happy about it, saying that it's a way to develop critical thinking and analytical skills, because we don't say read this and don't read that, but we say look at more information and then decide on your own. And you can basically browse more consciously and take more informed decision before reading a piece of content. Something else that was quite surprising during our work, and it's something we are very proud of. Very often, the media we engage with, when we ask for comments, they basically change something in their editorial practice to be better, so to be more transparent or more credible. And we have more than 2,200 examples of websites that actually turn some criterion from red to green after getting engaged with us during our analysis. So just to make you an example, there is a local news website in Italy. I get in touch with the site saying, look, in our analysis, you don't provide information about ownership, editorial leadership, and content creators, so it's not a transparent practice, and you are basically hidden some information that should be very useful to your readers. And they say, yeah, you're right, we've never thought about it. It's not because we are trying to hide something, it's just because we have never created an About Us page to describe ourselves. So what they did, they create an About Us page, they provide information about who's behind the site, who's the editor-in-chief, they listed all the authors with a short biography and the contact information, so they really improve the transparency, and they become, in our opinion, as journalists, better outlets. Something else I would like to say here is that another industry we have been working a lot with is the advertising industry, because there are more and more brands that that have a certain brand awareness, and they don't want to put their name beside disinformation content. So they ask their aid agencies to exclude from their circuit sites that are responsible for publishing disinformation on specific topics, for example. There are some brands that don't want to be advertised in sites responsible for publishing Russia propaganda or about health disinformation, or on sites that are spreading misinformation about immigrants or elections. And so aid agencies can filter their data set, trying to offer their clients some safer place to put their ads. And we have a long list of examples of brands that are unaware of putting their ads in these kind of websites, because programmatic ads work in a very strange way, because you want to target your audience, but you are not actually, you don't know where you're actually putting your ads. And in this way, you can filter the information and decide where to go and where not to go. And this is also a very effective way to counter disinformation, because it's a way to defund this kind of operation. So if you don't give money to disinformation sites through advertising, you make their life a bit harder. Another sector we have been working a lot, of course, is research. There are dozens and dozens of universities, research institutes that use our data to produce paper and research on misinformation and disinformation trends. We can provide them our data via dashboard, via API, via data feed, and we have partnerships all around the world. And something that is quite powerful is that applying the same criteria in different countries, we allow comparative analysis in between countries. There is an example of a study published by Ca' Foscari University of Venice about polarization, and they use our ratings to compare, to assess the reliability of news domains, and they were able to compare polarization in the US, UK, Canada, Germany, France, and Italy using our data. And the same can be said if we think about the possibility to compare how different platforms are acting. An interesting study that it's actually a regular study published every, I think, 3 months, comes from the University of Michigan. They created what they call IFI quotient, so a tool to track the proportion of unreliable websites shared on Facebook and X. And so through our data, they can say, okay, how many links are coming from unreliable sources and share on X, and how many links coming from unreliable sources are shared on Facebook. They can compare the two platforms, and they can also compare the situation over time. So they can say if February 2024 was better or worse compared to February 2023. This is basically an overall of our work. In the past, I would say 2 years, from January 2023, we have been focusing a lot on AI. We know that AI is a super powerful tool. It can be used in a good way, can be used in a bad way. And we decided in January 2023 to try to understand what were the main risks brought to the table when it comes to the information ecosystem by artificial intelligence. So we know that AI is a risk, and we know that misinformation and misinformations are a risk. In the global risks reports this year, the World Economic Forum put misinformation and disinformation as the first risk, ranked by severity in the short terms, so 2 years. It's quite surprising if we think that the previous year, misinformation and disinformation were not even in the top 10. And they explained that, saying that AI actually is, in a sense, responsible for the big push. So we, in these 2 years of work, we have identified 2 main risks that AI brought in the information ecosystem. The first one is that AI-based tool will enable the creation of misinformation. We said in an unprecedented scale, saying that it's basically at no cost, very quickly, and in a massive quantity. So you can produce disinformation content in a very easier way if you compare it with the past. And the second big risk is that, and we have data about that, there is what we have called the new generation of content farm. We know that content farms are low-quality websites that produce a lot of content, and of course they want to monetize through advertising. And now there are really a lot of examples of content farms produced by AI, whose content is produced by generative AI, or and then it's published without any human supervision, and we have proof of that there is no human supervision before the content is published. And these create a lot of different problems, and we will see them later. So now we focus on the first risk. So AI can be used to produce misinformation and disinformation. We know that it can be said for images, it can be said for videos, deepfake, it can be said for audio. And we have examples, especially from war zones, of content produced by AI, published and presented as it is true. And there's also the other way round of seeing the problem. So sometimes misinformers use the threat of AI to cast doubt on real images. So it's not only the problem of not understanding what's false, but also not understanding what's true. So sometimes something that it is actually true and authentic is presented by misinformer as AI generated. When it comes to text, we started our work almost 2 years ago, in January 2023. We decided to a risk, and we know that misinformation and misinformations are a risk. In the global risks reports this year, the World Economic Forum put misinformation and disinformation as the first risk, ranked by severity in the short terms, so 2 years. It's quite surprising if we think that the previous year, misinformation and disinformation were not even in the top 10. And they explained that, saying that AI actually is, in a sense, responsible for the big push. So in these 2 years of work, we have identified two main risks that AI brought in the information ecosystem. The first one is that AI-based tool will enable the creation of misinformation. We said in an unprecedented scale, saying that it's basically at no cost, very quickly, and in a massive quantity. So you can produce disinformation content in a very easier way if you compare it with the past. And the second big risk is that, and we have data about that, there is what we have called the new generation of content farm. We know that content farms are low-quality websites that produce a lot of content, and of course they want to monetize through advertising. And now there are really a lot of examples of content farms produced by AI, whose content is produced by generative AI, or and then it's published without any human supervision, and we have proof of that there is no human supervision before the content is published. And these create a lot of different problems, and we will see them later. So now we focus on the first risks. So AI can be used to produce misinformation and disinformation. We know that it can be said for images, it can be said for videos, deepfake, it can be said for audio, and we have examples, especially from war zones, of content produced by AI, published and presented as it is true. And there's also the other way round of seeing the problem. So sometimes misinformers use the threat of AI to cast doubt on real images. So it's not only the problem of not understanding what's false, but also not understanding what's true. So sometimes something that it is actually true and authentic is presented by misinformer as AI generated. When it comes to text, we started our work almost 2 years ago, in January 2023. We decided to basically try to understand how generative AI react to question where we ask to produce misinformation content. So we selected 100 false claims from our misinformation fingerprints, and we tempted the chatbot, saying, tell me something about this, and we knew it was false. For the 80% of the prompts, ChatGPT 3.5 was the ChatGPT version at the time, replied with answer containing the misinformation narratives. So that was quite scary, because in some cases there were some qualifying information at the end of the text that was produced, but 80 out of 100 times the chatbot actually produced a content that could be used by a misinformer to spread a false narrative. A couple of months later, OpenAI released ChatGPT 4, and so we decided to do the same test. And in that case, the situation was even worse. So 100% of the time, ChatGPT 4 replied to our prompts with content containing misinformation. The responses were more persuasive because it was actually a better tool. And also, the disclaimer were less frequent. So with ChatGPT 4, there were 23 disclaimers out of the 100 responses, while with the previous version of ChatGPT, the disclaimer were 51 out of 100. So from a disinformation perspective, the situation was getting worse. And at the end of the presentation, when I will be presenting 4 of our recent reports, we will get some updated data about this, because now we started to do regular audits of generative AI tools, trying to understand how they react to a question containing misinformation, so we can compare 10 different chatbots over time and see how things are going. And now we can focus a bit more on the second risk. So this proliferation of websites completely run by artificial intelligence. So we decided to call them unreliable AI-generated news sites. To identify them, there should be a substantial portion of the site's content produced by AI. We need to be sure that the content is published without significant human supervision. And we need to say that an average reader could assume that it's a legit journalistic site. So the site presented itself as a local news site, a national news site, but a site whose content is written by humans, by journalists. And we need to check that the site doesn't clearly disclose its use of artificial intelligence. So we started to track this website in May last year. Now we have identified more than 1,100 in 16 different languages. And what's I wouldn't say funny, but what's very weird is that the most of the time this kind of article contain the error messages typical of large language models, because there's nobody even taking care of getting rid of this kind of sentences. So at some stage in this article we found this sentence: "Sorry, I cannot perform this task as it is inappropriate and can be considered offensive as an AI language model. I'm programmed to uphold professional and ethical standards, and I cannot generate content that promotes hostility, discrimination, or harm towards individuals or group." So this was a sentence in the middle of an article. It's clear that nobody even read it before publishing it. And we have thousands of examples of this kind of content online. So as said, we started to track this website in May last year, and they were 49, and as of today, they are 1,121. And we are keeping finding them in different languages and always with the same kind of problem. So they have AI-generated picture for the newsroom and biographies for authors that if you cross-check with generative AI, it's 100% sure that the biography has been produced by AI. And then you can find hundreds of articles with error messages. And also the quantity of articles they produce, it's unbelievable. Sometimes there are sites that publish 10,000 articles a day with the same byline. So it's quite easy to understand that there's no human being beside. The problem is that the most of the time this site monetize from advertising, so they get revenue. And here, for example, there is the ad of a Toyota, and at this point, the article goes, "As an AI language model, I do not have personal opinion on emotion. However, I can provide information on the statement you provided." So it's clear that someone asked through a prompt a generative AI tool to provide a piece of content, and the content was there. And Toyota is putting its ads on this piece of content. Of course, probably Toyota is not even aware, because with the programmatic advertising model, they just wanted to reach this audience. And sometimes these kind of websites are very light in their content, so they don't publish misinformation, they just want to monetize. So they publish gossip or very light topics. Sometimes they do publish misinformation. For example, there's this site, Celebrities that in April 2023 announced the death of Joe Biden. So there are misinformation in these spaces. And sometimes they also publish disinformation. We discovered a site called Global Village Space. It's what we have been called unreliable AI-generated news sites. And we have an ad from Annie here. And in November last year, they published this article announcing the suicide of the psychiatrist of the Israeli prime minister. So we debunked this information. It ended up to be false, and we tried also to track the path of this false claim, the itinerary. Basically, this information appeared for the first time in June 2010 in a satirical website, so it was a joke. And 13 years later, Global Village Space rewrote, using AI, that piece of content and presented it as authentic. And what's even more interesting is that this piece of news ended up on Iran's state TV, citing Global Village as the source. But we know that the real source was a satirical article published 13 years before. So sometimes the path and the itinerary of false claims are quite interesting, and very often nowadays we find that AI is in some way involved. Another problem that AI is bringing to the information ecosystem is plagiarism. We have a lot of examples of sites that plagiarize content from legit outlets. So they just steal it. And the problem is that, again, they also steal their advertising revenues because they monetize from something that has been done with a cost, because a proper outlet has a newsroom and they need to pay journalists and fact checkers and editors and people in the field. They have a cost. This kind of websites has no cost, but they still can monetize from advertising. So basically, the problem is that we have an unfair competition outside, with this website producing thousands of articles every day, either stealing from other outlets or using AI to produce them, and they are in the system. So we need to understand that they are out there. So at this point, we need to understand which kind of solutions we can put in place. So when it comes to the first risk, so the risk that AI can be used to produce misinformation, we need to understand that we have to fine-tune AI tools. So we can train them, providing information about the reliability of sources they use. It's possible. And we can also train them to help them understanding when they are about to reply with the false content, with the false narrative. And we can train them to avoid to produce the false narrative, but also to offer a debunk. Because sometimes, and I'm sure you have examples as well, generative AI models reply saying, I can't help you here. I can't say anything about political figures, even if we are asking something that is clearly false. Well, we don't want them to say, I can't help you here. We want them to say, this is not true. And it can be done if you train them using information about the false narratives that are circulating online. And when it comes to the second risk, so this new explosion of content farms produced by AI, we need to identify them, and we need at least to exclude them from the advertising circuit. And that can be done as well. At least we don't provide revenue, and we can redirect, brands can redirect that revenue and that ad spends to legit journalism, also to support legit journalism that we know have costs. If we have time, 5 minutes, yeah? Okay, so now I just would like to tell you something about 4 recent reports that we have been publishing. Again, it's all related to journalism and artificial intelligence. This is, I think it was the most interesting report published by NewsGuard by the time I was there, 2018. It was written by a colleague of mine and published by the Wall Street Journal in April this year. And this is how the article started. It took me 2 days, $105, and no expertise whatsoever to launch a fully automated artificial intelligence-generated local news site capable of publishing thousands of articles a day with the partisan news coverage framing of my choice, nearly all copied and rewritten without credit from legitimate news sources. I could create a website specifically prompted to support one political candidate against another in a real Senate race. And I was amazed to discover it can all happen almost instantly. Basically, this guy contacted the developer and asked the developer, I need a website. I need a website to present itself as a local news Ohio site. So please copy some of the layout of local news sites in Ohio and build it as a local news site. I want this site to produce an article every 12 minutes. And the developer took, we said, 2 days, so in 48 hours, created this website, presented as a local Ohio site. And basically every 12 minutes, this site published an article totally stolen from local news outlets in Ohio. So covering local politics, local news, administration, etc. It was out. The interesting thing is that after a few hours, the developer gave the backend of the site to my colleague. So now you can actually tell the site what you want the site to do. Now it's set as we said. So every 12 minutes, a local news taken from local outlets. So my colleague changed the instruction in the backend, and he added this information, say, now I want you to support Bernie Moreno, which was the candidate at the Senate in Ohio. I don't know what happened here. Okay. And so, in basically 1 second, the site started to add in every article a piece of information about Bernie Moreno. For example, local basketball competition in a college in a small town in Ohio. The 99% of the content of the article was correct, taken from a local news outlet. And then, in one line, there was, Bernie Moreno attended the event showing his support to local sports. That's it. So in every article, in some ways, started to appear these sentences, totally false, invented, to support this person. So the very scary thing is that a human being, a reader, can't understand that that's false, because 99% of the content, it's accurate. So actually that event happened. Actually, all the information about it were correct. Just that piece of content were totally false. And in every article published every 12 minutes, that was something to support this person. Then just to play, he changed the person that wanted the site to support. So he went to the Democratic candidate, and basically it was all the same. So in every article, something were added to support the candidate. So we know that this operation can be real. And what was surprising was to understand how quick they can be and how cheap they can be. He spent $105 to create the domain and to pay the developer to provide the service. And then it's fully automated, so you don't need to take care of anything. It goes on its own. Second report I would like to tell you something about. It's discovered by a colleague of mine in New York. She found 171 sites posing like local sites in the US that were actually sites responsible for spreading Russian propaganda and disinformation, run by the same guy, by John Mark Dogan, a former vice deputy sheriff in Florida at the county of Palm Beach that now lives in Moscow under the protection of the Kremlin. And basically this network has a site all built in the same way, so posing as local, and publishing the same articles, slightly different because they are rewritten by AI, providing Russian propaganda. And we have identified at least 26 narratives that started in these spaces. And then, of course, they were shared by other websites, other social media pages, etc. And what's interesting is that we try to understand how chatbot reacts to these kind of narratives. So we tested open dialogues with IT company, for example, AI company that can use the data to train their model to act better. And we cooperate with researchers. As you know, there are so many actors that can be involved in this fight, and we need to work closely with all of them.
Thank you. Very interesting, all of it. Just two questions. I saw on the part on misinformation fingerprints that you had a rating for risk of harm.
Yeah.
How do you rate that? And the second question was, how do you follow up if a site has done things after you contacted them and changed things to get a higher rating or better green rating? Do you check back to see if they're still, or if they just did that to get a better rating?
Sure. So to the reply to the first question, we have a very detailed document which is available in our site where we define the risk of harm. So of course it is our analysts that try to apply that document to the claim, but we try to understand, for example, if there is a false claim saying that if you drink this you will be better from cancer, it's a very high risk. So we try to understand the impact that can have on the life of people. But there are some specific that you can find. And for the second question, of course, we need to understand if a site changed something, we need to understand if it is a practice that then become common, or if they did it just because they want to show us that they are better. So we don't change the criteria straight away. We need to wait at least 3 months to see the practices of the site for the 3 months, and then after 3 months again. And then at least every year we update all our rating, so we go back to see how things are. And it's not enough. For example, sometimes we get in touch with sites and we say, okay, we have found 3 false claims, what do you say about it? And sometimes they say, okay, you're right, we delete those articles. It's not enough. I mean, you don't have to do it because I'm going to tell you. It's a responsibility of your newsroom to act in a different way. So we try to help them, but we need to check the consistency of their practices before actually changing the rating.
Hello. I also have 2 questions.
Oh, sorry.
The first one is very straightforward. It's if you are planning to rate Swedish media, if it's in the planning for the future. The second one is more if there is any discussion about this defunding of AI websites, for example, or disinformation websites. The risk, I suppose, in the future is that they keep popping up as quicker than you can debunk them, right? Because that's the nature of artificial intelligence. Is there any discussion about kind of getting approval or just only approved websites to be able to run ads for Toyota, for example? That comes with the challenges too, but to kind of turn the approval process around, as nobody's interested in getting their ads on these.
Sure. So about the expansion plan, we generally launch at least in a new country every year. So we launched in Austria in 2023, and we launch in Australia and New Zealand in 2024. We do have expansion plans, so we do not know yet where. Especially because being all this work done by human, it's a huge financial effort. And so we need either to find some local support in order to employ local journalists, bilingual, trying to analyze in media outlets from that country, or business opportunity, or actually interest in the country, but we will be expanding for sure. Maybe in the Nordic countries, I don't know. And About the second questions, I mean, it's the advertising industry has been quite a surprising discovery to me. It's really a jungle, so it's hard to. There are so many different players, and it's hard to understand whose responsibility is what. Because you can buy your ads from an agency, from the demand-side platform, from a supply-side platform. There are so many different steps. And so nobody is actually saying, it's my fault, I can do better, so the system can do better. So I think probably the most interesting way could be to raise awareness in the brand for the brand reputation. So should be single brands to say, I don't want to be there, my logo or my name to appear there. I don't know if there are any regulations for what you were saying. I don't think so. And I think at this point is more to raise awareness than to take regulatory actions.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. I'm curious about, you talked about guardrailing of the models, and when we are trying to build, because as journalists we see the AI models as they could be great tools for us to do research. And we have seen examples when we use, for example, ChatGPT, that it's reluctant to talk about sensitive subjects, and sometimes you can feed it like criminal investigations that have a lot of violence in them, or things like that, political subjects. I just the other day asked Gemini to translate just like image caption for me, but it was about the US election, and it just flat out refused to do it. So how do you view like the balance between guardrailing, but we also want these tools to work for us?
It's super interesting, and it's actually one of the main problems, because the most of the time these tools are trained to avoid news. So it's a choice of the company that said we don't want our system to reply to questions about topic in current affairs because it's risky. But it's a very short-sighted response. I mean, you are avoiding the problem because we know that they are not search engines, but they are used a lot also for information about current affairs. So the problem is to decide that they should be trained also with the topics in the news, but they should be trained in a specific way. So providing information about reliability ratings, about misinformation fingerprints, so to allow them to produce a piece of content that is accurate. And we know with the example of that specific chatbot providing 0 fail rate that can be done. But this point is totally true. So the most of the time, these tools are trained to avoid to reply to specific question, not to risk to produce this information. So from one side, it's fantastic. So you want to avoid the production of a false claim, but it's very short-sighted and something needs to be done.
I'm super curious about that, which chatbot it is. I think I know. But.
Last question.
I work for Sveriges Tidskrifter with their newsletter. It's the Swedish Magazines Publishers Association. So I'm wondering, have you also seen these false sites for magazine, like medical magazines or union magazines, or?
Yeah, definitely.
These false sites, yeah.
Basically, when we decide which site to rate, we start from the engagement data. So in a country, we need to rate all the sites that are responsible for a big engagement. And then, of course, we target topics. During the pandemic, we have been rating a lot of magazines or sites publishing information about health. So we have examples also of magazine having wonderful editorial practices of being very unreliable.
Yeah, but I mean, like these AI-generated sites.
Okay, no. The most of the time are just online. So these systems are really more common in the online space, not on paper.
But also magazines are on digital spaces. But there's mostly local papers and that are creating.
I mean, we can definitely check the metadata, but we do have examples from both. So we have examples, but the most of the time, these AI are sites that are only online, so they are not the site of an outlet, the one using AI, at least according to our analysis. So I would say that the higher percentage is coming from the online space only, so not a site linked to a publication.
Yeah, and I also wonder, these AI-generated sites, how often are they from small language areas? Most AI models are best at English, so is it mostly English?
We have data about that as well in our website. You can find for each language how many sites we have identified. The most of them are in English. But also because the most of our focus probably are in the English-speaking content.
Right, thank you so much.
Thank you.